Hello, independent artists out there in YouTube land. Welcome to the Empowered Indie Artist YouTube channel and podcast. Today, I want to talk about the difference between performing live and recording as a singer. They're drastically different. And what a lot of singers do is they get a lot of experience performing live, and then they show up at the studio with absolutely no practice as a singer in the studio. And it's so different that it can really throw you for a loop if you're not prepared for it. So I thought I'd talk about the differences first of all, and then also give you some tips. And be sure to grab your freebie. The freebie is the vocal production cheat sheet. And what this is if you start to practice recording vocals, guess what's going to happen? You're actually going to get good at it, and you will just be amazed at the world that will open up to you. Opportunities to be a session singer. If you have your own equipment, then recording is one thing, but then you have to know exactly how to bounce everything down, how to label all of the files so that your collaborator, most likely a producer or audio engineer, will understand what the heck you've done with your recordings. So that's what the vocal production cheat sheet is all about. I hope you'll grab it. And if you haven't started recording yet, don't even worry. I've got some other resources for you that I'll send you when you get that cheat sheet. All right, let's get to it. So the two biggest differences between performing live and recording in the studio. The first big difference is as a singer, you have to think about the fact that most likely people are not going to have a visual. They're only going to be listening with their ears. So you cannot lean on the visual aspect of a live performance when you're in the studio. So that means everything about your emotion, your detail in the emotion has to be quite amplified. People have to hear the sincerity or the sadness or the anger. They have to hear it and not just see a facial expression. Where on a live stage, you can, your body stance, everything can go into play and contribute to the emotion that you're trying to get across. But in the studio, you are completely reliant on your voice to get that emotion across. So being able to dial that in just so is a skill in and of itself and takes a lot of practice and a lot of nuance. So if you haven't gotten there yet, don't give up. You can get there. Number two, mic technique is really different in a studio than it is live. When you're performing live, you're most likely performing with a dynamic microphone like an SM50, what is it? SM58. And your live technique, you've probably learned that there's a lot of this kind of stuff you can do. Up close, you're basically eating the mic if it's pretty soft, and you might pull it back a little bit for louds, but generally you can do this movement in order to control your dynamics of your vocal performance. In a studio, you really don't want to be moving around too much in front of that microphone. It's very, very sensitive. And so even just like a subtle turn to your head like that will be picked up in the microphone. And if you do it in the middle of a phrase or in the middle of a vowel, it will be like, oh, what happened? Your voice, the tonality of your voice will even change. And so really you don't want to have any dramatic movements. And this is one of the hardest things for singers is because they're not used to having to sing without moving their head. Now you can do a little bit of movement, but really you want to make sure your mouth is never changing position. It's directed at the microphone. Now, of course, we're going to have louds and softs in a song, and this is something that you can work out with your recording engineer. There's depends on the effect that you want to get with your vocals, but there might be a place for, okay, this section of the song I'm going to be a lot closer to the microphone because I want it to sound really close and intimate. And then for the big loud moments of the song, I'll step back a few inches. Or your recording engineer might adjust the input gain and you just stay put. So there's a few things that you have to work out ahead of time based on the song and the goal that you're trying to achieve with your vocal quality. The other thing about mic technique is that your enunciation has to be clear, but you don't want your diction to be over dramatic. If you are a musical theater trained singer and you've got like a body mic or even one of these mics with a headphone that comes down, they react a lot differently to hard diction. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. What this is another aspect of mic technique where you're going to really want to modify some of the consonants in the recording studio versus live performance. Number three, audiences are much more forgiving of imperfections in a live performance. Now, when they go back and listen to it or watch it, it lives forever on the internet, then of course people can be totally knocking you down because of your mistake or your voice crack or whatever. But in the moment, if you have a good relationship with your audience, those kind of things can just blow over. Where when you're in the recording studio, you are basically zooming into your voice and all of the detail in every little moment, every little microscopic moment is being scrutinized by your own brain and by the team, your producer, your audio engineer, everybody who's participating in your song. They're going to be criticizing, scrutinizing your voice to the nth degree. And this emotionally can be really tough. So, recording while you're looking at your voice, listening to your voice through this high powered microscope, we're going to get to the next thing that's really different about recording versus live performance. But before we do, you are really going to have to dial in the detail of a vocal performance in the studio, where live you can really get away with a little more loosey goosey with everything. The pitch maybe isn't 100% of the time perfect, and maybe your voice cracked or, little imperfections. We just forgive unless, of course, they do live on in the internet, and then it might not be so forgivable. But if you have this relationship with your audience, again, like I said, you can just, they'll forgive you. Which leads me to number four. In the studio, we can cheat. Now, I've worked with people who recorded for the very first time, and they did not even know when they were coming to the studio that what we can do is we literally can break the song down in however many pieces we want. We could sing it from beginning to end 3, 4 times in a row if you want. We can do all the choruses first, and then all the verses, and then the bridge if you want. We can start at the beginning. We can start in the middle. We can start wherever you want. But what we end up doing is compiling all the takes. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. But this is the concept of cheating in the studio. It's real. And there's a cheating factor. Like, we could feel apologetic about the fact that we cheat, but this is the reality of modern technology and the fact that when people listen, they are listening to a song, a performance over and over and over and over. And the vocal is usually really up close and intimate. And so they're going to hear every single detail. And if there are imperfections, they may not know why they're not as drawn to a vocal performance, but that's what we are competing with as independent artists recording in the studio today. You are competing with the people who have, $1 million budgets in the highest end studio that can spend hours and hours and hours and days and days and days on one vocal performance, making sure every syllable is perfect. As an independent artist, you are competing with that. People, listeners, do not care if that person had a big budget and you didn't. They're really going to be listening through the same filter in their brain. Like, oh, there's something about this song that sounds a little less polished, a little less, commercial. It's a little more amateur. And they may not know why, but that's usually what it is. It's the difference between that recorded perfection versus not taking the time to be super picky. So, yes, we cheat in the studio, but you really have to in order to sound modern and polished. Okay, number 5, we talked a little bit about the diction technique when we were talking about mic technique. So your diction really has to be uh, there has to be clarity in everything that you say, unless your genre is something mumble. If it has the term mumble in it, you probably don't need to even worry about this. But for most other genres, we need to be able to understand what you're saying, but it cannot be over the top. Otherwise, your recording engineer is going to never want to invite you back. They'll be like, I can't record that singer. Their S's, their T's are just a nightmare because every time you hit a really hard T, that microphone is capturing that and they're having to go in and either minimize the hard T or use some tools that will actually create a cut on the frequencies. It can take a lot of time to get to get T's and S's under control in a recording environment. So if you can practice this at home and you can actually listen back and go, oh, wow, I didn't even realize I was hitting my T's and S's so hard. You can learn to kind of make sure we still hear the T, we still hear the S, but they're not so or time, the way that you learn how to do diction if you're classically trained or with musical theater. It's like over the top. And you really have to take that dial and dial it down about 100 notches for recording studio stuff. And yet again, everyone needs to be able to understand what you're saying. So it doesn't mean you don't use T's and you don't use S's. You just have to make sure they're very subtle. And number 6, we kind of talked a little bit about this when we were talking about cheating in the studio. But you don't have to start at the beginning of the song. I always ask the singers that I record, okay, so where do you want to start? And they usually don't really know. They hadn't really thought that they could start anywhere in the song. But once I've worked with a singer for a while and I know their voice, then I can start to detect that, oh, okay, there's probably going to be a little bit more strategy we need to do here. For example, if a singer's voice, as they sing higher, they lose their lower range, that's pretty common. Not lose it, but it just makes it a little less girthy, a little harder to reach the bottom notes. If your vocal cords have been, stretching in your top upper mix voice, then getting down low again can be hard. So if I'm listening to a song and I notice that the verses are pretty low and the choruses are high or vice versa, I'll say, let's start with the low stuff before your voice gets, a little bit more stretched out. And that way we've got the low stuff done. And a lot of times the lowest might be, towards the end of the song. It's the soft chorus. It's the bridge or, something like that. Well, let's start with the low, get that done so we can keep your voice nice and full and girthy in that low stuff. And then we can do the rest of the song. But you don't have to start at the top. You can do all of the chorus sections first if those are the things where your voice needs to be really fresh and not tired. But you also might want to say, okay, let's do all the sections except for the chorus first, because the chorus kind of wears me out after 5 times. So again, that's something that you'll want to work with probably your vocal coach ahead of time. If you are getting tired after singing a chorus 5 times, then either consider doing some tweaking with that chorus. Maybe the key is too high, or let's get your technique in order so that you can sing it as many times as you want. I mean, within reason, but you should really be able to sing for a couple of hours and not feel that your voice is tired. And if you have a song that's really wearing you out after just a few passes, then there's something to consider there with, your technique. All right, enough of that. And then 7, comping. Now, I already mentioned this a little bit when I talked about how you can cheat in the studio, but let's just bring this forward. Comping is short for compiling. And yes, in the studio, this is what we do. We compile takes. So I generally like to get 3 or 4 really good takes of every section of the song. Now, if a singer is, doing a take and it's not good, and, we work through it, we keep working, we keep doing passes and they're not good, and that took like 5 takes, I'm not going to count those until we start getting the good takes. Then I'll be like, okay, now let's get another one. Okay, now let's get another one. And that happens. Sometimes it's like either their brain is kind of whacking out because they're nervous, or they weren't properly prepared, or, their voice is just acting weird that morning or that day. There can be a lot of different things that happen. And so once we get to that point where the takes are coming out good and solid, then I say, okay, 3, 4 takes. Any more than that, it's kind of, diminishing returns. You don't need to go 20 takes. Some people will do that. They feel like they're supposed to just get take after take after take, and they're not really doing anyone any favors by doing that. You're wearing out the singer. You're giving the engineer way more work to do than what they really need. So really 3 or 4 takes, good. But then yes, literally you can comp take to take. Now, if the singer is really inconsistent, and if I'm talking to you and you're the singer, if your tone is really inconsistent, your timing, your phrasing is really inconsistent, it's going to be very hard to compile the takes. Now, that doesn't mean don't, try different things, but when you're working with your engineer, this is something that you would discuss with them. Like, I'm trying to decide how I want this part to be, and let them know I'm trying some different things. These aren't, 3 of the same take. I'm going to try a little wispier on this take. I'm going to try a little cleaner, a little more forward on this take. You can go ahead and explain to them what you're doing, that you're experimenting, and ask their opinion. If it's a really good engineer, hopefully they're engaged with your session and they'll have an opinion for you. And they might say, oh, yeah, I really like when you did it that way. And then you can zero in on your delivery for that phrase and then get a few takes with that delivery, so that when they go back and do the compiling of your takes, they've got that consistent tone, that consistent phrasing. Last thing I want to mention, number 8, live performance. You are almost always really going to be a reflection of the energy you're getting from your audience. It's such a synergistic relationship with your audience. And a lot of singers, they absolutely love that. They thrive on it and they kind of come to depend on it. So, as a singer in a recording studio, you are not going to be getting any of that audience energy or feedback. So, that can be really hard for singers to get used to. It's like, how do I get the same amount of energy from, I'm singing in a box basically with headphones on, and you're probably never going to have the same energy in the recording studio as you do performing in front of a live audience. There's just no way to replicate it in a studio. But what you can do is put your mind in that space of performing in front of a live audience. Sometimes I will coach singers who seem to be struggling with energy about, picture what you're going to be doing in the music video. Picture yourself performing this in front of a live audience. Imagine that your audience is 50 feet away from you, and your energy, your emotion, everything has to reach through the space and hit them 50 feet in front of you. And that can really help you to get the energy where you want it to be for your live recording. And that's reminds me, one more thing I forgot to put on my list. Number 9, singing with headphones. Oh my gosh. That's a lot different than when you are performing live and you're listening to the music, either speakers coming in front of you, the band behind you. You might have in-ears where you're going to be hearing the music, but you're also going to be hearing some ambiance from the stage. Singing with headphones on is really, if you've never done it before, it takes a minute. What you hear in your headphones is very specific to you. Some singers like to hear their voice really loud and maybe even really dry. Other singers like their voice, they want to hear it, but with a little bit of reverb. Some singers don't like to hear their voice at all. Some people like to slip one headphone off slightly so that they're hearing the ambiance of the room. Some people don't. So some people like the music really loud, some people like it soft. It really is a very individual decision. So when you go to a studio, don't feel like you are being a pain if you're like, ooh, I would really like to hear myself more. Or I feel like I can't really, like the music's too loud. I can't compete with that. Be really confident in what you want to hear in your ears. And again, you may need to practice recording at home before you really figure out exactly what you want. I personally have been recording for, so many years, but I've always had my own home studio to do it in. I mean, I recorded before without my home studio, but I epically failed at it. So I'm only going to count when I had my own studio. But I've kind of tried a lot of different things, and for a while, I didn't want to hear my voice at all, and I would do one headphone on, one headphone off. But recently, because I changed my audio interface, I was able to get reverb on the vocal coming into the headphones in the monitoring. And I like having my voice in there now with a little bit of reverb, but not too loud. It has to be pretty soft. And I still keep the music pretty soft. I don't like the music to be loud at all. But I have a soft voice and I'm usually doing backing vocal kind of things. So if it's too loud, I feel basically drowned out. And so that's a personal preference, and it's based on the type of singing that I usually do. So this is going to be very personal to you. Figure that out with your engineer, with your producer when you're recording at home. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to grab your freebie. Check us out at empoweredindieartists.com to learn more about the courses and the membership that we have for independent artists just like you, just trying to figure out this crazy, crazy music industry. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.